Here is Kevin McCarthy yesterday speaking to reporters outside the White House about the debt ceiling negotiations.
Mr. Speaker, is there what areas, if any, did you guys find agreement on today?
I think we both agree we want to be able to come to an agreement. We both agree on the areas that we know there's disagreement on, but I think it was productive in the professionalism, the honesty with one another, and the desire to try to find common ground.
I mean, the depressing part about this is, like, you know,
everything. I hate this news cycle. Every time it comes around, like this kind of garbage, it's just
Chuck
worst.
Schumer blew this when, honestly, when the Senate didn't take it up.
Mm-hmm. Tim Kaine said it yesterday.
In the lame duck.
Tim Kaine was like,
Yep.
well, we probably should have done this at the end of 2022, which was what
even Bill Kristol,
everyone was saying.
This is Chuck Schumer's job. This is his job to marshal this through the Senate. If it didn't happen there, it is his fault. Then it is Biden's fault for claiming that they're not going to negotiate and then negotiating. The other day, we played a clip about with Biden in Japan, I think it was, right, for the G7.
Mm-hmm.
As he was leaving, somebody had asked him about the 14th Amendment. He's like, well, we don't have time to do that, et cetera, et cetera. Well, David Dayen had an interesting piece. I don't know if he put it out yesterday or today or, 3 a.m. in the morning when he does this stuff. They have been following the debt ceiling fight. They have a feature they call X Date. He's talking about last weekend or this past weekend. White House leaked over the weekend that they had offered significant spending freezes on both defense and non-defense discretionary spending, amounting to a $1.1 trillion cut over 10 years, which Republicans rejected because they want higher defense spending. Now, I know that comes as a shock to everybody because we were told for months.
They want to cut out the wokeness. They
want to cut out the wokeness and how we're only hearing about defense cuts. The only anti-war party is the Republican Party. A Saturday statement from the White House press secretary emphasized closing tax loopholes and further drug price reform, which the president reinforced on a couple occasions. Meanwhile, Republican demands have gotten more extreme, including stiffer work requirements for SNAP and border security measures that aren't even in Limit, Save, Grow. That was the budget bill that they had passed. He goes on to talk about the negotiations, but then cites that Joe Biden had said, look, we don't have time for the 14th Amendment to invoke it. Now, you don't invoke the Constitution. You just follow the Constitution. Mm-hmm. You don't invoke the Constitution until your acts, which you believe are constitutional, are questioned. And that's how it would play out. If they went and they just paid the debt, they just raised this debt ceiling and did nothing, presumably somebody would sue them. Not quite clear who it would be. Maybe Congress, maybe I don't know what their standing necessarily would be. It's unclear what the harm is. Would sue them, and then they would resolve this, but presumably it would happen, in a month or weeks and weeks. We don't have time to do that. But it turns out that there is already litigation in front of a federal court involving the debt ceiling that the Biden administration is a part of. It's just that they could take a specific stance on it. The National Association of Government Employees. And when we first talked about the debt ceiling, I got a IM saying, don't forget. And I had forgotten this. I had forgotten from the last time. When there's a government shutdown, when they run out of money, it hurts government workers. Not just in terms of the agency's inability to sort of plan and know how much money they're going to have, but the National Association of Government Employees, their the problem that they have is that one of the ways, the extraordinary measures in which Janet Yellen will go to extend the debt ceiling is by freezing payments into the pension plans of the National Association of Government Employees. Now, if you don't put that money in today, and instead you put it in a month, you lose the growth that's associated with that over the course of that. So there is a harm to that, to their pension fund. And they have filed an emergency injunction in their case, alleging that the debt ceiling, the idea of it is unconstitutional.
Yeah.
Because the fourth, I think it's the fourth clause of the 14th Amendment says we pay our debts, period. It doesn't matter what our debt ceiling is. Whatever our debts are, we pay them. And the argument is that the debt ceiling statute, because it's a statute, effectively forces the president to use, God bless you, a line item veto, which has already been ruled unconstitutional. It gives the president excess power because Janet Yellen's extraordinary measures to stay under the borrowing limit included suspending investments into the NAG employee retirement plans. There is active and ongoing harm, which will get worse if the ceiling is hit. So this litigation's not theoretical, as he writes. There is a case. The plaintiffs are seeking quick action relief. Anyone spinning out a scenario about what might happen in the debt ceiling statute constitutionally is challenged is just being ignorant. It's being challenged in federal district court in Massachusetts right now. The defendants in the case are Janet Yellen and Joe Biden. They were served with a summons on May 16th and now have to June 6th to respond. That is after Janet Yellen's projected date of June 1st being the drop dead date, but they could certainly file earlier, Dayan writes, and it would be absurd for them not to. Biden's entire objection to, quote, invoking the 14th Amendment is that it would take too long. Well, here's an opportunity with an active lawsuit to get the kind of clarity they're seeking before the X date is reached. Biden could file a response offering no defense on the constitutionality of the debt ceiling or even agreeing that it's unconstitutional. And then the judge would have to rule on the injunction. And if there's no argument between the parties, he could rule that, okay, there doesn't seem to be a case here. It's unconstitutional. Or he could seek an intervener, someone with standing to argue in the stead of the president and the Treasury Secretary. But since they're the only ones who can actually harm the plaintiffs, and
we can still hear Sam, but his camera is
I don't know
off.
why it's doing that. And he's the only one who can actually harm the plaintiffs by failing to execute appropriations and furloughing or firing employees. It's not clear who the intervener could be. So that's option A. Option B is for Biden to keep finding a way for McCarthy to harm beneficiaries of government services in the broader economy a year and a half before his election.
Well said by Dayan there.
Exactly.
I mean, he's not going to do it, but this is the opportunity. And it undercuts what he's saying, that there's just no time to make this some sort of legal battle. And if the Republicans want to file something separately and challenge it with the Supreme Court, go ahead. Go ahead. I mean, that was some of what they were arguing when Biden was taking months and months and months to act on student debt relief. Like, oh, well, it's just going to get tied up in the courts. Well, then go for it. That doesn't mean that it's an excuse not to try.
There's it literally is.
But for them, it is the
excuse not to try.
Yeah, they don't want that,
exactly.
that conversation, which is, I mean, it's doomed. This is a doomed strategy. You can't avoid these things like that. Like this, it's like a retentiveness, and you just have to actually fight. This is the problem I've always had with the Democrats, is that they think they can just maintain all of this stuff and maintain democracy, and you have to cultivate it actively. You can't be like playing defense. And this whole thing of will out organize like voter suppression, like that's the whole problem. Like they think that, and it's also like, do they think we all have a goldfish memory? Like we were talking about this in December, and to hear Bill Kristol say the exact same things we were saying, like we should have dealt with this then.
Well, they have a goldfish memory. There were quotes from Democrats saying we thought that the Republicans might be a little more reasonable this time around. In what universe?
But they don't believe that. They just think people will accept that. Like they can't be that stupid.
I think you cannot overestimate the level of incompetence and stupidity that is exercised. The only way I would say that the only way I would qualify that statement is that also presumes a much broader set of goals, as opposed to a bunch of individuals with narrow self-interests functioning. So Chuck Schumer doesn't want to offend any of his colleagues. He wants to maintain his position as the Senate, or as the leader of the Democrats in the Senate. That could be a majority, that could be a minority, but the primary thing is, how does he maintain his position? And the way that he maintains his position is to ask nothing of those senators.
I mean, is he even that active in negotiations? Biden's kicking the rest of the Democratic leaders out of the room.
I'm talking about in December.
Oh, okay.
When there was a lot of people who were saying we've got to pass this debt ceiling, he was like, I don't want to ask that of anybody. He's afraid of Joe Manchin. Mm-hmm. They could have done it very quietly. They could have stuck it into the reconciliation bill. End of story. And now Joe Biden has the opportunity, and this isn't terribly constitutional. I mean, controversial, I would say. The Constitution say the debt must be paid. Period. End of story.
Yeah.
And in fact, we are now, I think we said yesterday on the show, like, it seems to me you could sue Joe Biden for not upholding the Constitution. And that's what's happening right now with these workers. And so it's going to be interesting to see if the June 6th deadline in which they need to answer that subpoena, Yellen and Biden, if that is actually the true deadline that they're operating under. Like, because I'll tell you, my experience with the debt ceiling has always been, they announce a date and it ends up being a month or 2 months later.
Right.
And they've been, just saying June 1 for a while. And that seems super suspicious to me.
Yeah. I mean, she'll have some other safeguards before that.
Or the real deadline that they're worried about is not when we hit the debt ceiling, but when they have to go to court.
Maybe. That's a little far-fetched for me. I don't think that they're that.
Dan.
We will ask Dan. I bet they're not that worried about this case. That's just my guess. Guess.
There's only, I guess there's like two approaches that you would take from this case. One is you welcome it. One is you don't. Well,
the rational one would be to welcome it. Yes.
Exactly. And they don't seem to be doing that.
No. Because they're, as again, Dan said in his piece on this yesterday, they're appealing to their constituency of centrist op-ed writers. And they would not like that very much. Democrats can't get into power and just maintain. It's literally irresponsible when you have a party as extreme as the Republican Party.
Speaking of maintenance, David Day in 1247, so about a half hour or 15 minutes ago. So Joe Biden, who mumbles in public about, quote, having the authority, end quote, to continue paying the nation's bills, has signaled intention to file opposition to the case challenging the constitutionality of the debt ceiling statute. It's not that Biden or the White House thinks that's not enough time or that the Supreme Court will stop any effort to end run the debt limit. By their actions, they are demonstrably opposed to challenging the debt limit. They believe in it.
Yep. They love great.
All right. Well, Dane will be on Friday. We'll get an update on that.